All right. We are back for chapter 3, and we're going to be talking about values and the helping relationship. And this one's going to be a little bit longer than the first two chapters. And this is, I think, one of the most important chapters in this book. And so I'm glad we're going to go ahead and cover it early on. But this chapter is all about understanding how our personal and professional values impact the counseling process and how we can navigate those value conflicts ethically and compassionately. As counselors, our own work, our own worldview shapes everything we do, from how we listen to how we respond. But our ethical codes remind us that counseling is all about the client's values, not ours. And I find myself having to remind myself, okay, Alex, this is not about you. This is about the client. Let's focus on what they value, right? So I even have to check myself, and I'm a little bit more seasoned. So reminding yourself it's not about you, it's about the client. It's not about your values, it's about the client's values. So let's talk about those learning objectives. So by the end of this chapter, you should be able to clarify how therapist values influence the counseling process. So your values, how might it influence the counseling process? Understand the ethical issues related to imposing personal values. Identify appropriate reasons to refer a client to another professional, and what counts as a discriminatory referral or a values-based referral. And then finally, we'll look at some court cases and ethical dilemmas that have shaped this conversation in real world settings. Some more learning objectives will also reflect on supervision and self-awareness, especially when our values conflict with those of our clients. We'll explore values conflicts around sensitive issues like sexual attitudes, abortion, spirituality, end of life decisions, all those fun things we're told not to talk about at dinner parties, right? And throughout, I'll ask you to think about, where do your values come from and how do they show up, or how do you anticipate that they might show up when you work with clients? So this is a big chapter for self-reflection all throughout. All right, so when we talk about personal values, and it shows up in a couple of our ethics, we'll look at ACA and AMCA. Let's just ground this in the ethical codes, right? The ACA Code of Ethics clearly emphasizes respect for client autonomy, meaning clients have the right to make decisions consistent with their own values and beliefs. And so you have to be aware of and avoid opposing your own values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So just because, this is a strongly held belief for you doesn't mean it is for the client, but that doesn't mean you can't help that client through their worldview. You can hold both at the same time. And sometimes that's difficult, but that's what we have supervision and training for. So we respect the diversity of clients, trainees, and research participants. Well, we're talking about clients here from your perspective, right? And seek training in areas which you're at risk of imposing your values onto clients. So if you are like, oh, I don't know if I would know how to help, this type of client, well, then that's where you better start reading. You better start signing up for some continuing ed. If you go to that MCA conference, look for a session where they might be talking about that particular issue you're not sure about. So this is especially important when your values are inconsistent with the client's goals, or maybe they're discriminatory in nature. And then AMCA says, you're aware of your own values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, how they apply in a society with clients from diverse ethnic, social, cultural, religious, economic backgrounds, and you don't impose your values. So same thing that ACA says. And I don't have a slide for ASCA, but I can guarantee you ASCA says something about it too. All right, so our responsibility is to support clients in exploring and clarifying those values, not to shape or replace them in our own way. So ethically, values impositions violates the very heart of the counseling relationship, which is built on unconditional positive regard and respect for diversity, right? All right, so let's talk about counselor responsibilities. As counselors, our ethical responsibilities include knowing ourselves. Self-awareness is very important. Being aware of our own values and how they might show up in sessions. That means engaging in personal therapy, consultation, and supervision. Do not go it alone, right? So engaging in those things when we need it. And then it also means taking active steps to prevent our personal beliefs from influencing treatment goals or interventions. So as you're training, notice what clients or issues you react strongly to, what really ruffles your feathers or really baffles you. those moments are going to reveal where your values are the most active. Okay, anything else I want to say about this? Of course, you can't discriminate. That's illegal, not only illegal, but also unethical. Don't refer based on differing values. Maintain unconditional positive regard. Yes, said all I need to say about that, or what I want to say. All right, so next we're going to talk about the importance of value exploration. So the importance of exploring your own personal values. One of the best ways to explore your values is through self-reflection, like journaling, supervision, and even your own therapy. Can I say it enough? Go to therapy. Many programs encourage or require you to go to therapy because it allows you to develop self-awareness in a safe environment. And remember, value awareness is a lifelong process. So you might think you know yourself, but each client you meet will teach you something new about what you believe and why. And we'll do a little bit of this in class. We'll talk about exploring our own values in class. All right, now what is a values imposition? What does that mean? Don't impose your values on clients, values impositions. So let's talk about that. So this occurs when counselors directly or indirectly try to influence a client to adopt their own attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. So it's like we're teaching them how to live, quote unquote, the right way, like we know best. But you got to remember the client's the expert on their life. So even well-intentioned statements like, I think you'd feel better if you forgave them, or you should leave that relationship, can really reflect our own personal biases. So that's why we don't give advice. So our role isn't to advise or persuade, it's to facilitate exploration. It's a journey that they're on, that we're coming in beside them, and we're walking along beside them supportively, and we're just exploring. So we're not here to convert, we're here to empower. Empower. As part of the definition of in counseling is empowerment. So we're not here to change anybody's mind or tell them how to live their life, basically. All right, so values conflicts. When your personal values conflict with a client's, that's a cue to slow down and reflect. It's completely normal to feel discomfort. What matters is how you handle it. So seek supervision and discuss strategies to manage those differences. Referrals should only be considered when you genuinely lack the skills, not the comfort to help the client. So it should be about what issue the client is bringing. Maybe it's an eating disorder or addictions, and you just don't feel trained in that, and you know somebody who is specialized in that. Well, then that would be an appropriate referral. But someone shows up and they're gay and you don't want to deal with that, you can't just refer them out based on that. And also you think about, you have, when we think about the LGBT, it's not a visible, that's not a visible minority, right? So they come in, you build this relationship, you're 8 or 9 sessions down the road and they come out to you. Okay, then what? Then they've built this trusting relationship with the therapist, and all of a sudden you're going to say, well, oh, well, you're gay, so no, I can't work with you. That's client abandonment. That's another ethical violation. So you've got to be open to working with all different types of identities and backgrounds. And um, and that's just one example. And I use that example because it's so common, and that's where a lot of the lawsuits and stuff come out is about that topic. But um, yeah, so referral should only be considered when you lack the skills, right? So if you're a couples counselor, you can counsel any couple, right? Not just straight couples. So referring due to discomfort can actually be discriminatory, and even if your intentions feel ethical, right? So hopefully that makes sense why you can't refer based on values. So discriminatory referrals are significant ethical concerns, of course. Sometimes counselors claim insufficient training when the real issue is a moral or values-based discomfort. For example, and I've already used this example, is working with LGBTQ clients or clients seeking abortions, things like that. Before making a referral, ask yourself, have I sought supervision? Have I pursued training? Is this about skill or is this about personal bias? So the ethical approach is to learn and to grow, not to avoid or exclude. And there are some things going on, specifically, I think in Texas, where they're really pushing hard. There's a conservative group of counselors pushing hard and lobbying to be able to discriminate against clients. And I think that's so dangerous. So, um, yes. All right, so let's talk about legal framework regarding values. So let's explore some court cases. So some court cases over the last decade have explored what happens when counselors' values clashed with professional expectations. So two notable cases involved Christian counseling students who objected to working with LGBTQ plus clients, claiming that being referred required to affirm diverse identities that violated their religious freedom. Again, I go back to what we said in the beginning. Is it about your values or is it about the client's values? Being a counselor is not about you, it's about the client first. So when we go in here talking about my religious freedom and all this, yes, you do have that. You should have religious freedom. But if you're going to be a counselor, it's not about you, it's about your client. So in both cases, the courts upheld the university's right to require non-discriminatory practice consistent with the ACA Code of Ethics. And these cases highlight a tension between freedom of conscience and professional responsibility. So, Julia Ward and is one, and then the Jennifer Keaton one that happened at Augusta State University. And so both of those were kind of about the same things. So, what is freedom of conscience? So, the debate continues, right? For example, this Arizona State Bill 1365, it attempts to protect professionals who refuse services that conflict with their sincerely held religious beliefs. And then similar, you look at Tennessee in 2016, there was legislation that allowed licensed counselors to legally refuse clients on religious grounds. So while these laws claim to protect religious freedom, they risk violating ethical codes and emphasize access, equity, and non-discrimination. So as future counselors, you'll need to balance your beliefs with your ethical duty to serve all clients competently. So student responsibilities and rights. So as a counseling students, like all professionals, have a right to personal beliefs. And I've said this before, nobody's asking you to throw your beliefs away, but you also have a responsibility to manage those beliefs ethically. And that's what we're here to talk about. So supervision is the place to process these tensions, learn skills for cultural humility, and ensure your values don't interfere with your client's autonomy. Ethical development is not about erasing your values, it's about containing them so they don't harm the client or the profession. Remember, do no harm, right? And not only do you do no harm, you actually have to help people. So, all right, so some of those taboo dinner table topics. Let's jump into there. Let's talk about sexuality. So counselors often work with clients whose sexual values or behaviors differ from their own, whether that's premarital sex, polyamory, kink, or orientation. Ignoring conversations about sexuality can lead to harm. For instance, reinforcing shame or missing key mental health factors. So rather than avoiding the topic, learn to approach it with curiosity and compassion. Always, always, always. Ask open-ended questions like, can you tell me more about this, what this relationship means to you, right? Instead of assuming judgment. Abortion. Abortion's another value charged issue for sure. Clients exploring abortion may need space to process grief, guilt, or relief, not moral judgment. From a legal and ethical standpoint, counselors are expected to exercise reasonable care, meaning they provide competent, unbiased support. Failure to do so could be considered negligence. And if you find yourself struggling to remain neutral, supervision and consultation are the best next steps, not avoidance. Okay. So spirituality and religion. Now let's talk about these things. So these are deeply personal sources of meaning, and they can be both part of a client's problem and their solution, right? It could go both ways. Religion often involves structure and ritual, while spirituality tends to be more personal search for meaning and connection. So both are essential to consider in holistic counseling, but ignoring them can alienate clients, but assuming you understand them can be equally harmful. So be curious. Even if you were raised Methodist and your client was raised Methodist, maybe that looks different for them. So be curious always. Um, let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about here. Yeah, I always just say let the client lead. If they want, to include, like I have a client now and who's his faith is very important to him. So we talk about prayer as sort of a mindful meditation. It helps with his anxiety. Um, you incorporate that as it pertains to the client. But if you're religious and you don't impose that, you let the client lead, right? That's what I mean by that. All right, I'm going backwards. Here we go. All right, so key issues related to spiritual and religious values. Ask yourself, can I understand this client's beliefs enough to work within their worldview? Am I willing to stay curious rather than corrective? And how do I respond if a client's beliefs conflict with my own? All right, so competence here isn't about agreement, it's about respect and openness, willing to just go with the client, walk along beside them. So the role of spiritual, so we're still talking about the role of spiritual and religious values in counseling. Research consistently shows that religion and spirituality can be powerful resources of resilience. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of religious like rules and teachings promote healthy behaviors, mindfulness, meditation, right? I was talking about earlier, prayer, avoiding alcohol, your body is a temple, taking care of your body. So there's a lot of research to show that it can have a really powerful, it can be a really powerful source of resilience. So when appropriate, include them in your assessment and treatment planning. You always want to ask these questions. You want to know the stuff about your client. If a client uses prayer or meditation, you might explore how these practices help them cope. And the key is to let the client lead. They define what spirituality or faith means for them, not you. Training in spirituality integrated counseling can also enhance your ability to meet diverse needs ethically. So, again, if a client comes in and they're a part of a religion that you're not familiar with, get to reading, get to researching, get to finding out, right? You don't just oh, well, I don't know anything about that religion, so let me refer you to this little um I'm not thinking of this practice over here that specializes in that religion, right? You have to learn and you get curious and you become competent in it. All right. So on the flip side, non-religious clients. Of course, not all clients are going to identify as religious or spiritual, and that's equally valid. That is equally valid. Our job is to respect all belief systems, including secular worldviews. So ethical practice means developing competence in working with atheists, agnostics, and humanists without imposing assumptions-based spirituality as a necessary part of wellness. So please don't, if you have a client come in that's non-religious and you are, please don't say, oh, you should really go to church. You better pray about it, right? That's imposing your values. We have to respect all worldviews. Okay. So, end of life decisions. Finally, we'll talk about this. All right. So, the topics can evoke strong emotions and values conflicts, both personally and professionally. In cases like Baxter versus the state of Montana and laws like the California End of Life Option Act and Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, there's a really good documentary about that one, about Oregon, that I would encourage you if you're curious. But all these things reflect evolving views on medical aid and in dying. And as counselors, we may work with clients or families grappling with these decisions, and our role is to provide empathy, not persuasion. And so this one is hard. And also, our state laws are really going to dictate how we approach this too, because laws always trump ethics. Okay, so and I don't think assisted end of life. I don't know how legal that is in Mississippi. Last I checked, it was not. Um, but places like Oregon, it is. And so that's, something to look into. So there's also the Death with Dignity Act. And so it's a statute that allows a mentally competent adult diagnosed with a terminal illness to remain in control during his final days by asking for and receiving a prescription medication to hasten death. So again, it's that 1997 Oregon state law. Other jurisdictions that followed include California, Colorado, DC, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, New Mexico, Vermont, Washington. You see Mississippi's not on that list. So some key terms. So if you find yourself working in one of these places, or you find yourself in this situation, these are good terms to know. Rational suicide. is choosing to end one's life due to unbearable suffering from a terminal illness. Aid in dying is self-administering prescriptions medication to end life. A hastened death is withholding or withdrawing treatment to allow natural death to occur. And then advanced directives is written documents that outlines one's wishes for medical care at the end of life. And so each of these brings unique ethical challenges around autonomy, competence, and compassion. So all of those topics are very, very charged. I know. But that is, what I want you to remember here as we close at the end is that ethical counseling is not value free, it's value aware. And that your beliefs matter, but so do your clients. And the goal isn't to have the right values, quote unquote, it's to be aware of them, manage them, and honor the dignity of every client that you serve. So thank you for engaging thoughtfully in this discussion on values and ethics, and we'll talk more in class.